Imagine waking up tomorrow and checking your phone. The news is everywhere, breaking headlines, CNN, Fox, every network. A tech billionaire just announced the most ambitious project in human history. They're building a city, not on land, not in the desert, not even on Mars, underwater, a real-life Atlantis. Glass domes the size of stadiums, underwater highways, farms growing food in the ocean, 50,000 people living 200 feet below the surface. And it's not science fiction. Construction starts in 2 years. Your first thought? That's insane. Your second thought? Wait, could that actually work? Today, we're going to explore what would really happen if we built a modern Atlantis. And I promise you, the answer is way stranger and more terrifying than you think. Now, before you dismiss this as just another billionaire fantasy, here's why this actually matters more than you realize. This isn't about building an underwater city for fun. This is about survival. Right now, sea levels are rising faster than any time in human history. Miami is already flooding during high tide. New Orleans, Venice, Bangkok, entire cities are sinking. By 2050, over 300 million people will live in areas that flood regularly. By 2100, coastal cities as we know them might not exist. So when someone says, what if we just moved underwater instead of fighting the ocean? They're not being crazy. They're asking the question nobody wants to face. What happens when we run out of land? This is about understanding whether humanity's future is on the surface or beneath the waves. And the answer will change everything you think you know about where we're headed as a species. Let's start with the obvious appeal. Why does building Atlantis sound so perfect? First, there's space. Lots of it. Earth's surface is 71% ocean. We've built on maybe 3% of available land. The ocean floor? We've explored less than 5% of it. That means there's an entire planet down there, untouched, unclaimed, ready to build on. Imagine the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Florida. Depth, 200 feet. Gentle currents, close enough to the surface for sunlight, far enough down to avoid hurricanes. You could build a city there. Thousands of glass domes connected by tunnels, each dome the size of a football stadium, housing apartments, schools, hospitals. Underwater farms growing kelp and fish, desalination plants turning seawater into drinking water. And because you're underwater, you don't worry about weather. No tornadoes, no wildfires, no droughts. The ocean temperature stays constant year-round. It's climate-controlled without even trying. Second, there's resources. The ocean isn't empty. It's full of things we need. Minerals on the seafloor, rare earth elements worth trillions, manganese nodules just sitting there, waiting to be collected, oil and gas reserves we haven't tapped yet, and food. The ocean produces more protein than all the farms on land combined. If you live underwater, you're right next to the source. No supply chains, no transportation costs, just open the door and harvest. Third, there's the ultimate reason. It sounds cool as hell. Humanity has always been obsessed with conquering new frontiers. We climbed mountains, we explored jungles, we went to space. The ocean is the final frontier on Earth, and unlike Mars, you don't need a rocket to get there. You just need to hold your breath and dive. But here's the question nobody asks when they're fantasizing about underwater cities. If building Atlantis is such a good idea, why hasn't anyone done it yet? Think about it. We've had the technology to build underwater structures since the 1960s. We've had submarines, diving suits, pressurized habitats. We've sent people to the moon. We've built the International Space Station, but we haven't built a single permanent underwater city. Not one. Why? The answer is going to blow your mind, and it starts with something most people never think about: pressure. Let's talk about what actually happens when you go underwater. At sea level, atmospheric pressure is 14.7 pounds per square inch. That's the weight of all the air above you pressing down. You don't feel it because you're used to it. Your body is designed for it. But when you dive underwater, pressure increases fast. Every 33 feet, you descend, pressure increases by 1 atmosphere. At 33 feet, you're experiencing 29.4 pounds per square inch, double the surface pressure. At 200 feet, the depth we're talking about for Atlantis, you're experiencing 88 pounds per square inch, 6 times the pressure you're used to. Now here's the problem. Human bodies aren't designed for that. Your lungs compress. Your sinuses feel like they're going to explode. If you hold your breath and surface too fast, the air in your lungs expands and ruptures them. You drown from the inside out. Divers call it pulmonary barotrauma. It's excruciating. But even worse, nitrogen narcosis. When you breathe compressed air under pressure, nitrogen dissolves into your bloodstream. At shallow depths, no problem. But go deep enough, and that nitrogen starts acting like an anesthetic. You get drunk, euphoric, you make terrible decisions. Divers have been known to remove their regulators underwater because they thought they could breathe water. They died smiling. So how do you build a city where the pressure alone can kill you? The answer is, you don't fight the pressure, you match it. Inside your underwater city, you pump in air until the internal pressure equals the external water pressure. That way, the walls don't collapse, the domes don't implode, everything stays stable. Problem solved, right? Not even close. Because now you've created a different nightmare. If you're living in a habitat pressurized to 6 atmospheres, your body adapts. Your blood absorbs nitrogen. Your tissues saturate. You become part of that pressure system. And here's the terrifying part. If you want to leave, if you want to go back to the surface, you can't just swim up. You have to decompress. Slowly. Very slowly. At 200 feet, if you've been down there for weeks, you'd need to spend days in a decompression chamber, gradually reducing pressure so the nitrogen in your blood can escape safely. If you surface too fast, that nitrogen forms bubbles in your blood, in your joints, in your brain. It's called decompression sickness, the bends, and it can kill you or leave you paralyzed for life. Let me put this in perspective for you. Imagine living in a city where leaving is a multi-day medical procedure, where going to visit family on the surface requires a week of preparation and a week of recovery, where an emergency evacuation is impossible. If there's a fire, a flood, a structural failure, you can't just run, you're trapped, because the ocean itself is a prison. Does that sound like a place you'd want to live? Here's what nobody tells you when they pitch underwater cities. You're not building a home. You're building a submarine that never surfaces. And the people inside, they're not residents, they're crew. And just like sailors on a submarine, they're dependent on systems, life support, air recycling, water filtration, power generation. If any of those systems fail, everyone dies, not in hours, in minutes. Now let's talk about something even worse. Structural failure. Building on land is easy. Gravity pulls down. You build up. Foundation, walls, roof. Simple. But underwater, pressure is omnidirectional. It's pushing from every direction. Your walls aren't just holding up a roof. They're holding back millions of gallons of water pressing in from all sides. At 200 feet, every square foot of your dome is experiencing 12,960 pounds of force. That's 6.5 tons per square foot. Now scale that up to a dome the size of a football stadium. You're talking about billions of pounds of force. The walls would need to be thick, reinforced concrete, steel, maybe even experimental materials like carbon fiber or transparent aluminum. And even then, you're gambling, because materials fail. Metal fatigues, concrete cracks, seals degrade. One small fracture, one weak point, and the entire structure implodes. In 2023, the Titan submersible imploded at 12,500 feet. 5 people were inside. They died so fast their brains didn't have time to register pain. The implosion happened in less than a millisecond. Now imagine that happening to a city dome with 10,000 people inside. You wouldn't even have time to scream. But let's say we solve the pressure problem. Let's say we build walls strong enough, materials tough enough. We create a perfect pressurized habitat. Now we face the next nightmare, logistics. How do you build a city underwater? On land, you pour concrete. You lay bricks, you weld steel. Gravity helps you. The air is free. Tools work normally. But underwater, everything is harder. Welding requires special equipment. Concrete needs to cure in pressurized molds. Workers need to wear dive suits or live in pressurized habitats for months at a time, subjected to the same decompression risks. And here's the kicker. It's expensive. Insanely expensive. The International Space Station costs $150 billion to build. And that's in space, where there's no pressure, no corrosion, and no ocean trying to crush you. An underwater city, estimates put it at $500 billion to $1 trillion for a single city, housing 50,000 people. That's $10 to $20 million per person. You could buy every resident a mansion in Beverly Hills for that price. And even if you built it, even if you spent $1 trillion creating the perfect underwater utopia, you'd still face the ultimate problem. Humans weren't meant to live underwater. Psychologically, we need sunlight. At 200 feet, sunlight is dim, filtered, blue and green wavelengths only, no red, no orange. Everything looks like a twilight zone. Studies on submarine crews show that prolonged isolation in artificial environments leads to depression, anxiety, aggression, seasonal affective disorder on steroids. You'd need artificial lighting, vitamin D supplements, psychiatric care, and even then people would break. The suicide rate would be astronomical. There's a reason submarine deployments are limited to 6 months, because after that, people start to lose it. Now imagine that's your whole life. You can't just go for a walk in the park. You can't feel rain. You can't breathe fresh air without spending days decompressing. You're in a bubble forever. And that's not a city, and that's a prison with a view. If that makes you realize that some frontiers aren't meant to be crossed, that some dreams are actually nightmares in disguise, hit that like button, because this is the kind of reality check we need before we commit billions of dollars and thousands of lives to an idea that sounds amazing on paper but falls apart the moment you think it through. Now here's the part that really messes with your head. Even if we never build Atlantis, we're already creating the conditions that might force us to try. Because here's what most people don't realize. Climate change isn't just about rising temperatures. It's about rising oceans. Right now, sea levels are rising at 3.4 millimeters per year. That doesn't sound like much, but over decades, over centuries, it adds up. By 2100, sea levels could rise 3 to 6 feet. Cities like New York, Los Angeles, Miami, they'll be partially underwater, not destroyed, just flooded, regularly. And here's the insane part. We're not going to abandon those cities. They're too valuable, too important. So what are we going to do? We're going to adapt. We'll build seawalls. We'll elevate buildings. We'll pump water out faster than it comes in. But eventually, that won't be enough. And when it's not, someone's going to suggest the unthinkable. What if we just stop fighting the ocean and learn to live in it? And here's the scariest thought. They might be right, because the alternative, retreating inland, abandoning coastlines, displacing hundreds of millions of people, that might be even more impossible than building underwater. So maybe Atlantis isn't a fantasy. Maybe it's a preview, a glimpse of a future where humanity didn't choose to go underwater. We were forced to. And that changes everything, because if you're building out of necessity, if you're building because you have no choice, you'll take risks you wouldn't normally take. You'll cut corners. You'll ignore warning signs. And that's when disasters happen. So what does this mean for you? For us, living in 2025? It means we need to start asking hard questions. Not about whether we can build Atlantis, but about whether we should. Because the technology exists. The money exists. The desperation, especially as coastlines disappear, will exist. And when those three things come together, someone's going to try. Maybe not today, maybe not in 10 years, but eventually, someone will build the first underwater city. And when they do, we'll find out if humanity's future really is beneath the waves, or if we just built the most expensive graveyard in history. But here's where the story takes a turn you won't see coming. Because while we'll probably never build a full-scale Atlantis, we are building something just as extreme, something just as ambitious, something that might actually work. We're building floating cities. Right now, companies like Oceanics and the Seasteading Institute are designing cities that don't sink into the ocean. They float on it, massive platforms anchored to the seafloor, rising and falling with the tides. These aren't houseboats. These are engineered structures designed to house thousands of people, with farms, schools, hospitals, everything a city needs. And unlike underwater habitats, you don't need pressurization. You don't need decompression. You just step outside and you're breathing normal air. If there's an emergency, you get on a boat and leave. Simple. The first prototypes are already being tested in the Maldives and South Korea. And here's the kicker. They're not being built as experiments. They're being built as solutions for island nations that are literally sinking, for coastal cities running out of space, for a world that's running out of land. So maybe the question isn't whether we'll build Atlantis. Maybe the question is whether we'll build something even more radical. Cities that don't belong to any country, that float in international waters, that operate under their own laws. Seasteads, floating nations, a new kind of frontier. And whether that's brilliant or terrifying, well, that's a question for another time. For now, just remember this. Every time someone proposes an impossible idea, every time someone says we should build a city underwater, or on Mars, or in the clouds, they're not just dreaming. They're asking a deeper question. Where do we go when Earth runs out of room? And the fact that we're even asking that question tells you everything you need to know about where we are as a species. We've conquered the land, we've touched the sky, and now we're looking at the ocean, at space, at places we were never meant to survive, and we're saying, why not? Because that's what humans do. We push boundaries, we ignore warnings, we build things that shouldn't exist, and sometimes we succeed. And sometimes we build a city that implodes and kills everyone inside. The only way to know which one it'll be, someone has to try. And when they do, the whole world will be watching.